Dr. Emily Rodriguez worked quietly in the cafeteria kitchen when she heard that another mysterious poisoning case had arrived at the hospital. The doctors couldn't make a diagnosis. The symptoms didn't match any known disease. But Emily, whom the hospital staff called the quiet cafeteria woman, had already found the source of this poisoning with her 15 years of toxicology expertise. No one would believe her. St. Mary's Hospital was one of the busiest medical centers in downtown Chicago. With over 800 beds and thousands of staff members, it served the community around the clock. Emily Rodriguez had been working in the hospital cafeteria for 3 years, preparing meals, cleaning equipment, and maintaining the kitchen with quiet efficiency. Every morning at 5 a.m., Emily arrived through the staff entrance, put on her hairnet and apron, and began her day. She prepared breakfast for patients, staff meals, and managed food inventory. To everyone around her, she was just another hard-working cafeteria employee, reliable, quiet, and unremarkable. But Emily Rodriguez held a secret that would have shocked her colleagues. She had a PhD in chemistry from Johns Hopkins University and had spent 15 years working as a senior toxicologist for the FBI's forensic laboratory. She had analyzed thousands of poison cases, identified unknown chemical compounds, and helped solve some of the most complex poisoning investigations in the country. 3 years ago, a case had gone wrong. A contaminated evidence sample had exposed Emily to a rare neurotoxin, leaving her with chronic health issues and forcing her into early retirement. The FBI pension wasn't enough to cover her medical bills, so she had taken the cafeteria job to make ends meet. Nobody at St. Mary's knew about her background, and Emily preferred it that way. This morning felt different. As Emily prepped vegetables for the lunch service, she overheard two nurses talking by the coffee station. "That's the fourth case this week," Nurse Patricia was saying to her colleague. "Same symptoms, nausea, disorientation, mild paralysis. But Dr. Harrison can't figure out what's causing it." "Food poisoning," suggested the other nurse. "That's what we thought, but the blood work doesn't show any common bacterial infections. It's really strange." Emily's hands paused in their chopping. Those symptoms sounded familiar, very familiar. During her FBI years, she had seen similar presentations in cases involving specific types of chemical poisoning. "Are all the patients from the same area?" Emily asked quietly. The nurses looked surprised that the cafeteria worker was joining their conversation. "Excuse me," Patricia said. "I just wondered if they all lived in the same neighborhood or ate at the same places," Emily said, keeping her voice casual. "Actually, yes. They're all from the Riverside district. Why do you ask?" Emily shrugged. "Just curious. I hope they get better soon." The nurses moved on, but Emily's mind was racing. 4 cases with identical symptoms, all from the same area. This wasn't a coincidence. Her toxicology training was telling her this was deliberate poisoning, and she had a good idea what type of compound could cause those specific symptoms. During her lunch break, Emily made her way to the medical records department. She knew she had no business being there, but she needed more information. "Hi, I'm Emily from the cafeteria," she said to the clerk. Dr. Harrison asked me to check something about the recent food poisoning cases. He wanted to rule out any cafeteria contamination. It was a lie, but it worked. The clerk pulled up the files for the 4 recent patients. Emily studied the symptoms carefully. Onset within 2 to 4 hours. Progressive muscle weakness starting in the extremities, mild cognitive impairment, and elevated acetylcholine levels. Her heart sank as the pattern became clear. This was organophosphate poisoning, a class of chemicals used in pesticides and in higher concentrations as nerve agents. Someone was deliberately poisoning people in the Riverside district. Emily returned to the cafeteria kitchen with her mind spinning. Organophosphate poisoning wasn't something that happened accidentally. These chemicals required specific knowledge to obtain and use. Whoever was doing this understood chemistry and had access to dangerous compounds. She spent the rest of her shift thinking about the pattern. All 4 victims were from Riverside District, but what connected them specifically? As she cleaned the kitchen equipment, Emily's analytical mind worked through the possibilities. That evening, Emily drove to the Riverside District. It was a working-class neighborhood with small restaurants, convenience stores, and a weekly farmer's market. She parked and walked around, observing the area with the trained eye of a former federal investigator. The farmer's market was setting up for the next day. Emily noticed several vendors arranging their produce stands, including one that specialized in organic vegetables. A middle-aged man with graying hair was carefully arranging tomatoes and lettuce. "Beautiful vegetables," Emily commented as she approached his stand. "Thank you," the man replied with a slight accent. "All organic, grown with natural methods." Emily examined the produce. It looked fresh and well-maintained, but something about the vendor made her uneasy. His hands showed chemical stains, and she noticed small burn marks on his fingers, signs of someone who worked with harsh chemicals regularly. "What do you use for pest control?" Emily asked casually. The vendor's eyes sharpened. "Natural methods only, no chemicals." But Emily's trained nose detected something else. The faint smell of organophosphate compounds on his clothes. After 15 years of working with these chemicals, she could identify the odor immediately. "I'm new to organic gardening," Emily continued. "Any tips for keeping bugs away?" "Lady, I told you, natural methods. Now buy something or move along." His defensive response confirmed Emily's suspicions. This man was lying about his methods, and she was willing to bet he was the source of the poisoning. Emily bought some tomatoes and left, but she made note of the vendor's license plate and the name on his stand. Peterson's Organic Farm. Back home that night, Emily faced a dilemma. She had strong suspicions about the vendor, but she was just a cafeteria worker. Who would believe her? And more importantly, how could she prove it without revealing her background? The next morning brought tragic news. A 5th victim had arrived at the hospital, a 67-year-old woman who had shopped at the farmer's market. But this time the poisoning was more severe. Dr. Harrison was considering transferring her to the intensive care unit. Emily couldn't stay silent any longer. During her break, she approached Dr. Harrison in the hallway. "Doctor, I need to speak with you about the poisoning cases. Dr. Harrison looked surprised. I'm sorry, who are you? Emily Rodriguez. I work in the cafeteria. I think I might have information about the source of the poisoning. Dr. Harrison looked skeptical. Ms. Rodriguez, I appreciate your concern, but this is a complex medical investigation. Perhaps you should speak with hospital security if you have safety concerns about food preparation. It's not the hospital food, Emily said firmly. The victims are all being poisoned by organophosphate compounds, probably from contaminated vegetables at the Riverside Farmers Market. Dr. Harrison stopped walking. How could you possibly know that? Emily took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been dreading. Because I have a PhD in chemistry and spent 15 years as an FBI toxicologist, I recognize the symptoms. The silence stretched between them. Dr. Harrison stared at her in disbelief. You're telling me that our cafeteria worker is a former FBI scientist? Yes. And if you don't act quickly, more people are going to die. Dr. Harrison studied Emily's face, searching for signs of deception. What he saw was absolute certainty and professional competence. Tell me what you know, he said finally. Emily explained her observations about the symptoms, the chemical signatures, and her suspicions about Peterson's organic farm. Dr. Harrison listened intently, asking technical questions that Emily answered with the precision of a trained expert. If you're right about this, Dr. Harrison said, we need to contact the police immediately. We need to contact the FBI, Emily corrected. This is chemical terrorism, even if it's small scale. Local police won't have the expertise to handle organophosphate analysis. Dr. Harrison made the call. Within 2 hours, FBI agents arrived at St. Mary's Hospital. Agent Michael Chen and Agent Lisa Thompson arrived at St. Mary's Hospital with a full forensic team. When Dr. Harrison introduced them to Emily Rodriguez, Agent Chen's eyebrows raised in recognition. Emily Rodriguez? From the DC lab? Emily nodded. Hello, Michael. It's been a while. 3 years, Agent Chen said, his expression softening. How are you feeling? Better. Not perfect, but functional. Agent Thompson looked between them, confused. Dr. Harrison stepped forward to explain. Ms. Rodriguez identified the poisoning pattern and the likely source. She believes it's organophosphate contamination from a vendor at the local farmers market. Agent Chen turned to Emily with renewed respect. Walk me through your analysis. Emily laid out her findings with scientific precision, the symptom progression, the chemical signatures she suspected, the geographic clustering of victims, and her observations of the suspicious vendor. Peterson's organic farm, she concluded. The vendor showed clear signs of chemical exposure, lied about his methods, and had the distinctive odor of organophosphate compounds on his clothing. That's solid preliminary analysis, Agent Chen said. We'll need to test the victim's blood for specific organophosphate metabolites and get samples from the vendor's produce. Already thought of that, Emily said, pulling out a small container. I bought tomatoes from his stand yesterday. They're in my refrigerator if you want to test them. Agent Thompson looked impressed despite herself. You maintained chain of custody on potential evidence? Old habits, Emily said with a slight smile. The FBI team worked quickly. Within hours, they had confirmed Emily's analysis. The tomatoes from Peterson's stand contained dangerous levels of organophosphate residue, far beyond anything that could occur naturally or through normal agricultural use. A raid on Peterson's farm revealed a sophisticated operation. Harold Peterson, a former chemical plant worker, had been deliberately contaminating his produce with industrial pesticides. His motive was twisted. He believed he was testing people's resistance to chemicals and proving that organic food was a lie. Peterson had been gradually increasing the chemical concentrations, which explained why the latest victim was so much sicker. If Emily hadn't intervened, the next batch of contaminated produce could have killed multiple people. At the press conference announcing Peterson's arrest, FBI agent Chen made sure to credit Emily's expertise. This case was solved because a trained professional recognized patterns that others missed. Dr. Emily Rodriguez's background in toxicology was crucial to identifying the source and preventing additional casualties. The hospital staff was stunned. Their quiet cafeteria worker was a former FBI scientist who had just solved a case that had baffled doctors. Dr. Harrison approached Emily after the press conference. Dr. Rodriguez, I owe you an apology, and I have an offer. What kind of offer? We have an opening in our toxicology lab. The pay is better than cafeteria work, and you'd be using your actual expertise. Are you interested? Emily considered it. For 3 years, she had been hiding from her past, afraid that her health issues would prevent her from doing the work she loved. But this case had shown her that her skills were still sharp, her instincts still reliable. I'd need accommodations for my medical condition, Emily said. Of course, we'll work with whatever you need. Emily looked around the hospital where she had spent 3 years invisible and unrecognized. Now she could return to the work that defined her, helping people in a different but equally important way. Yes, she said finally, I'm interested. 6 months later, Dr. Emily Rodriguez was running St. Mary's toxicology department. She had helped identify 2 more chemical contamination incidents and trained the medical staff to recognize the signs of deliberate poisoning. The cafeteria still served meals, but now it was staffed by people who were actually trained in food service. Emily occasionally visited to thank them for keeping her secret during her time there. Harold Peterson was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for domestic terrorism. The 5 victims recovered completely, thanks to early identification and proper treatment. Emily's story spread through the medical community as an example of how expertise can be found in unexpected places. She began giving lectures about recognizing chemical poisoning, always emphasizing that critical knowledge often hides behind ordinary appearances. On quiet evenings, Emily reflected on the strange path that had led her from FBI labs to a hospital cafeteria and back to professional toxicology. Sometimes the skills we think we've lost are exactly the skills the world needs most. The case became known as the Cafeteria Chemist investigation, though Emily preferred a simpler description: just doing my job. 3 months after Emily's return to toxicology, the case's broader impact became clear. Agent Chen was promoted to head the FBI's new Chemical Terrorism Response Unit, with Agent Thompson as his deputy. Their success with the Peterson case had demonstrated the need for specialized teams to handle domestic chemical threats. Dr. Harrison implemented sweeping changes at St. Mary's Hospital. New protocols were established for identifying unusual symptom patterns, and all staff received basic training in recognizing potential poisoning cases. The hospital became a model for other medical facilities across the country. The Peterson case sparked a national conversation about food safety and organic certification. New regulations were passed requiring stricter monitoring of farmers' markets, and the FDA increased random testing of organic produce. What had started as one man's twisted experiment led to stronger protections for consumers nationwide. Agent Chen often reflected that the case had taught him something valuable. Expertise could be found anywhere, and the most important discoveries sometimes came from the most unexpected sources. Emily Rodriguez had proven that true scientific skill never disappears. It just waits for the right moment to serve justice. The Cafeteria Chemist case became a landmark study in both criminal justice and medical detection, taught in FBI academies and medical schools alike. It stood as proof that heroism comes in many forms, and sometimes salvation arrives wearing a hairnet and carrying a lunch tray. As we've seen in this story, real heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes the most ordinary-looking people possess life-saving skills. Emily's story teaches us this: never judge anyone by their appearance, and never underestimate your own abilities. Each of us may have hidden powers that can change the world. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more true stories like this. Let me know in the comments what kind of stories you'd like to hear next. See you in the next video.